My Brother Sam is Dead, Chapter 13. "I want to see Colonel Parsons, please, sir," I said. The adjutant stared at me through the half-open door. "What about?" "Sam Meeker sent me. He's been arrested as a cattle thief. Colonel Parsons can't be troubled about that." "But it's all a mistake," I said. "He didn't do it. He was chasing the ones who did." The adjutant laughed. "Sure," he said. "He didn't steal the cows. They followed him out of the barn, and on to their accord." "Please," I begged, "it's true. We were sitting right there." "Enough," he said. "Colonel Parsons is in bed. Come back in the morning and perhaps he'll see you then." There wasn't any point with arguing him, I realized. I would have to see Colonel Parsons in the morning. The cows were still loose, and I had to do something about them anyway. "Thank you, sir," I said. And I turned and ran back over the empty spaces of the snow towards the training ground. And in the brightness of the moonlight, it was easy to see the forms of the 3 cattle standing in the middle of the snowy field. As fast as I could, I pushed them out of the snow I pushed out into the snow towards them. As I came up, I saw the 4th cow lying on the ground. It was dead, half buried in the snow, and its belly had been sliced open, its guts glistening wet in the moonlight. The 3 living cows were staggering around in the deep snow and bawling unhappily. I found a stick in the tree line at the edge of the field and began driving the cattle home. It was a terrible job. They hated floundering around in the deep snow and balked constantly. It took me over a half hour to get them safely back into the barn. I threw them down some hay, and then I went into the tavern. Mother was sitting in front of the fire looking worried. "I saw you coming across the road," she said. "Where's Sam?" "They arrested him," I said. "The ones who stole the cattle beat him up, and then they said that he had stolen the cattle himself and marched him off somewhere." "Back to the encampment?" "I guess so," I said. They'll let him go in the morning, won't they? I mean, all we have to do is explain what happened, don't we?" She shook her head. "I have a terrible foreboding, Timothy. I want to pray." The dead cow is out there still, Mother. I want to go get it before somebody else does. If we hadn't gotten the time to pray to the Lord for help, we hadn't got much time at all, have we? So we got down on our knees and we prayed for Sam. Then I got the butchering knives out and we went out together into the snowfield and cut up the cow. The meat was already beginning to freeze, making it hard to cut, but we had to chop it into small pieces, too, because neither of us was strong enough to carry off a whole side of beef by ourselves. It took us an hour of struggling to cut the animal and carry it home. We hid it in the barn under the hay. It would keep well enough in that cold weather. In the morning I went back to Captain Bett's house to talk to Colonel Parsons. They made me wait around outside the door for a half hour before they let me in. Colonel Parsons seemed nice enough, but awfully busy. I told him the story. He shrugged. "It surprises me that Sam would be taken for a thief. I thought he was a man of greater patriotism than that, but people fool you." "He didn't do it, sir. These other men—" He held up his hand to stop me. "I know. You told me that. In any case, there isn't anything I can do. They've taken him out to the encampment, and it'll be up to General Putnam to do what he wants. I'd get out there in a hurry, though. The general is determined to make an example of somebody. He could go hard with Sam. General Putnam is great and dedicated patriot, but he does not take defection from duty lightly. Now he's beginning to get worried. At first, it had seemed that it wouldn't take much to get this straightened out, or get much to straighten out the mistake. After all, it was our cows that had been stolen. Surely they'd believe us when we told them Sam hadn't taken them. But the way Colonel Parsons talked, it bothered me. He didn't seem to care very much about if Sam was guilty or not. It didn't seem very important to him. I said so to Mother. She looked sad. They've seen so much death, these soldiers. What does the life of one more man mean to them?" She sighed. "Now we must go down to the encampment and try to save him." We couldn't both go. One of us had to stay and watch the tavern. We were required by law to keep open most of the time in case travelers came by. In any case, it was too risky to leave the place unguarded. We decided that Mother ought to go. She was the adult. Her word would go over better with General Putnam than mine would. She put on her bonnet and wrapped in a shawl around her shoulders and started out. I stood in the yard and watched her go down the road until she was merely a black spot in the field of white. Then I went out to the barn to look at the cattle over more carefully, in case any of them had been hurt. Not much mattered. I was determined to butcher them as soon as I had the chance. Betsy Reed came to the tavern a half hour later. She hadn't bothered to comb her hair properly, and she looked scared. What happened to Sam? I heard he was arrested for something. Stealing our own cattle, I said. She got angry. Sam didn't do that, she said. I didn't say that he did. I told her the story. Mother's really worried. I'd never seen her so down, not even when she found out father was dead. She bore up when he got captured and bore up when we learned he died, but she isn't bearing up now. She's trying, but she isn't bearing up. It's not having enough to eat, Betsy said. You don't have the strength to keep your spirits up, she said. She sat down and dropped her head on the taproom table. What are we going to do about Sam? I don't know. Mother is finding out. Will they hang him if they think he did it? I don't know, I said. It seemed a good chance that they would, the way everybody was talking about how hard General Putnam was, but I didn't want to think about that. Probably they will just put him in prison. I wouldn't mind that, Betsy said. At least he wouldn't be able to get himself into trouble anymore. I didn't say anything. All I could think about was father and Jerry Sanford. Could your father do anything? Maybe, she said. I'll go talk to him right away. She left. I was glad. I didn't want to dwell on Sam. There was plenty of things I could do to keep myself busy. Besides my regular chores, I had to start getting ready to butcher. This meant putting up hooks for hanging the meat in the barn. We'd never butchered 8 head of cattle at one time. We didn't have the hanging space for them. To occupy my mind, I spent my spare moments figuring out the best way we could do it. And of course, people kept coming in. There were the usual customers, officers wanting food, ordinary soldiers wanting a chance to get warm, Reading people buying their things. There were also people talking about Sam. Word had gotten out, and people wanted to know what happened. Mr. Beach came in, and Mr. Huron, and Captain Betts. I expected that Mother would be back by noon, but she wasn't, and by mid-afternoon I began to worry. I kept looking out the window every 5 minutes, but she still hadn't come. I got supper stew started. It was about all we served to anybody anymore. It began to get dark, and then she came in. She looked exhausted and slumped down in her chair by the fire. I gave her a glass of rum to warm her up, and I was about to ask what happened, but just then some officers came in wanting dinner and some drinks, and we got busy. It wasn't until an hour later that we'd gotten the officers settled into their rum and water that she could tell me the story out in the kitchen. She had to wait until the middle of the afternoon to see General Putnam. The aides kept putting her off and sending her away, but she stuck it out, and finally she got to see him. He was curt. He didn't really want to take the time. She told her story. He merely shrugged. You see what the problem is, Tim? Those 2 men who brought him in have sworn it, and it was Sam who stole the animals. Her voice was slow and tired and hopeless. Sam wasn't supposed to be there. He was supposed to be on duty with Colonel Parsons at the Betts house. But Colonel Parsons didn't care. He always let Sam come over to visit. Still, he wasn't supposed to. Officially, Sam had deserted his post. Why should they believe Sam about the cattle over the other men? Why should they believe me? I'm his mother. I'd certainly lie to save him. She paused. Go out and see if the officers need anything and bring me some more rum. I'm cold. They wouldn't let us see Sam, but a few days later, Colonel Reed came into the tavern and sat down with Mother and me. He looked very serious. I've been down to the encampment, he said. I've talked with some of the officers there. I'm afraid it looks bad for Sam. Would you like some rum, Colonel Reed? Mother asked. Her voice was harsh. I'm going to have some myself. Without waiting for her to answer, she brought the rum and poured 2 glasses. Thank you, Colonel Reed said. Why is it bad for Sam, sir? I asked. He sipped the rum. There's a problem. Those soldiers Sam caught with the cattle are scared to death. Putnam will simply decide to hang them all as an example. They're prepared to tell any kind of lie about Sam to get themselves off. If it were just Sam's word against somebody else's, it might be different, but there are 2 of them, and if they tell the same story, it can be convincing. He shook his head. Then there's the fact that Sam comes from a Tory family. We're not really Tories, though, I said. Father wasn't. None of us are. That's not the way General Putnam's going to see it. But won't there be a trial, sir? I said. Oh, yes, Colonel Reed said. A regular court-martial. There'll be a presiding justice and a board of officers acting as a jury. But we have to face the fact that the board will do whatever they think General Putnam wants, and if they decide that Putnam wants to make an example of somebody, they'll hang. They'll bend over backwards to satisfy him, regardless of the evidence. What can we do? Pray, Colonel Reed said. Actually, there are some others going to be tried at the same time. A butcher named Edward Jones from Ridgefield, who was caught spying for the British, another man for stealing shoes, and another for desertion, I think. So there's always hope that they'll get enough blood out of the others to let Sam go. His war record is good, and that'll help. The trial was set for February 6th, 3 weeks away. There was nothing to do but wait it out. I didn't know what to think. I didn't see how we could find Sam guilty. He'd fought for 3 years. He's risked his life, and now could they decide to punish him for something he hadn't done? It just didn't make sense. 2 or 3 times I went out to the encampment to try to see him, but they wouldn't let me. They had him locked into a cabin that they were using for a prison, but they wouldn't even let me or tell me which one it was, because they were afraid I'd smuggle a weapon to him or help him escape or something. After I've been out there a couple of times, they realized who I was, so they wouldn't even let me into the encampment. I figured I could sneak in after dark if I had to. They'd cut down most of the trees around about for lumber and firewood, and there were rocks on the sides of this steep hill which let down into the encampment, and I figured I could come down in their shadows, but there wasn't any use of trying until I knew where they'd hidden him, so I gave up for the moment and waited. I was beginning to get worried about Mother. She'd never been one for drinking much, just a glass of rum punch occasionally, and when she was chilled or sick, but she began to take more of it. Not that she was drunk all the time or anything like that, but sometimes I'd come upon her standing by herself with her eyes empty and staring at and a little glass of rum in her hands. She'd hardly noticed that I was there until I spoke to her. It wasn't much, as I say, but she has changed, and it bothered me. Finally, February 6th came. Colonel Reed came the first thing in the morning. I'm going out to the encampment, he said. I'll bring back the news tonight. All day long I was so nervous I couldn't even eat. I couldn't sit still. I had to keep moving around, and I was glad when people came in wanting food or hot drinks so I could keep busy. Once 2 officers came in and ordered hot rum to warm up with. One of them said, Did you see any of the court-martial? No, the other said. Why bother? Putman's determined to hang them all anyway. I shuddered, but I said nothing. It was after dark when Colonel Reed came in. He was tired. His shoulders were sagging and his face was grim. He didn't have anything at all to say. I knew what happened. Where's your mother? She's out in the kitchen. I went and got her. She stood in the doorway, saying nothing. Miss Meeker, I have bad news. They're going to execute Sam. She smiled politely. That isn't news, Colonel Reed. I've known that for 3 weeks. That was the story. The man who had been caught stealing the shoes would get 100 lashes. The deserter would get 100 lashes. The butcher, Edward Jones, was to be hung. Sam Meeker, the cattle thief, was to be shot. The executions would take place on the hill near the encampment on February 16th, a Tuesday. The Sunday before there would be a compulsory church attendance. It surprised me that I didn't cry or faint or anything like that. I was numb and nervous and nothing more. I began making plans. The first thing I did was to see Colonel Parsons. He put me off twice because he knew what I was coming for, but he was quartered next door to us, and he knew he'd have to come see me sooner or later. And finally he did. I can't help you, he said bluntly. The court-martial has decided, and that's the end of it. Then who can help me, sir? I demanded. He stared at me. General Putman. Nobody but General Putman. All right, then. Give me a note to see him, sir. Why should I do that? He asked. Because Sam didn't do it, and you know that's true. He stared at me. Sir? Sir! He put his head down on his hands. War is hard, boy. Sometimes we do a lot of things we don't want to do. A lot of very good men have been killed in this war, and all we can do is hope that it's been worth it. Maybe it hasn't. Maybe in the end we'll conclude that. But I don't think so. I think it will be worth it, despite death and destruction. He raised his hand again and looked at me. No, he said, I don't think that Sam stole the cows, but I can't prove it, and neither can you. Who knows? Maybe he did do it after all. Maybe he had some kind of arrangement with those other men as to throw suspicion off himself. Sam would have never done that. He smacked his hand down on the table. Watch how you address me, he snapped. I blushed. I'm sorry, sir. He put his hands behind his head and leaned back. Do you want to know what General Putman is thinking? It's this. He's thinking that he can't win the war if he doesn't keep the people on his side. He's thinking that he can't keep the people on his side if the troops are running amok among the civilian population raping the women, stealing the cattle, and burning houses. He's determined to scare the wits out of the troops and keep them in line, and he's thinking it doesn't matter very much who he executes to do it. So many men have died, so many mothers have wept, so many brothers and sisters have cried. He is thinking that in the long run, if he executes somebody, he'll shorten the war and save more lives. It doesn't matter to him much who he executes. The one man's agony is like another's. One mother's tears are no wetter than anyone else's, and that's why he's going to have Sam shot. But Sam isn't guilty, sir. The court-martial says he was. But they're wrong. He went silent. I waited. Then he said, because I happen to believe you, I'm going to give you a letter to see General Putman. But I am warning you, right now, that won't do a bit of good. The one thing Putman cannot do at this point is show clemency. If he is going to make his point with the troops, he can't start letting people off easily. He took a piece of paper, wrote something on it swiftly, and folded it and sealed it and addressed it to General Putman. Then he gave it to me, and I left running. I ran most of the way to the encampment over the packed snow. The sky was cloudy. There would be snow and more snow. I arrived at the gate, my breath rasping and my throat so hard I couldn't speak. I handed the letter to the guard. He took it and called over to a soldier. Take this boy to General Putman, he said. We walked up to the encampment street past a long line of huts. They were identical, hundreds of them, and with plumes of bluish smoke rising like a forest into the air. Soldiers were everywhere, cutting wood, cleaning things, and drilling. Then we came to a house, bigger than the huts, but made of the same kind of logs. The soldier handed my letter to the guard at the door. The guard took it inside, and in about 5 minutes he came back. Just wait, he said. I waited a half hour, and then an hour, and then 2 hours. Officers went in and out, and I still waited. I got hungry, but I didn't dare leave to go in search of something to eat, because it became 1 in the afternoon, and then a soldier came out and brought me in. General Putman was sitting behind the rough trestle table they'd set up for his desk. There were papers neatly arranged in ink bottles and pens, sand for blotting the ink, and a stack of maps. He was a big man, about 60, with lots of white hair. He wore a continental uniform of buff and blue, but he did not look kind. Meeker? Yes, sir. All right, let's have it. He scared me. His voice was hard and his eyes flashed, but I told him the whole story exactly as it had happened, and I finished by saying, Sam wouldn't steal our own cattle. He just wouldn't. He's been fighting for 3 years. He's a good soldier. He didn't do it, sir. I swear it. I know because enough, he said. My time is valuable. He took up a piece of paper and quickly wrote something on it, and he said, I'll consider it. That'll be all. Sir, can I see my brother? He frowned at me, and then he shouted, Sergeant, take this boy up to the stockade to see Sam Meeker. See that they stay 6 feet apart and pass nothing between them. Thank you, sir, I said, and then I followed the guard out. The stockade was situated just at the bottom of the slope, which dropped down to the encampment. It was a wooden hut, like the others, but surrounded on all sides by picket fence to give the prisoners a place outdoors to walk around in. The guards were posted at every corner. There were some small holes cut into a fence, each about a foot square. The guard put his face into one of the holes and shouted, Meeker, you have a visitor here. Then he drew a line in the snow with his toe about 6 feet from the fence. Stay behind that line, he said. Sam's face appeared at the hole. He was dirty and unshaven, and his hair was uncombed. Timmy, he said. How are you, Sam? Oh, I'm all right for a man about to die. Don't give up hope, I said. I've just seen General Putman, and he's about to consider your case. Is that right? He said. Really? He said he would. What did he actually say? Sam said. Does he believe I'm not guilty? I don't know. He didn't say. You're a good boy, Tim. Sam, how come they found you guilty? I guess I didn't score enough telling points, he said. No, really. The other men lied. They knew they were in for it right from the moment that I spotted them in the training ground. I only saw one of them at first, and I leveled the musket at him, but the other one was down on the ground in the shadows, gutting the cow. He came up behind me and stuck his knife point in my back, so they got me. Then they bashed me around a little and took me in. Oh, they were smart. They had a story all worked out about hearing someone shout, Stop, thief, and seeing me driving the cattle across the training ground and coming out to get me. And of course, I wasn't supposed to be home anyway. I was supposed to be out on duty at the Betts' house, so that went against me, and that was that. What else can we do, Sam? Pray, I guess. You better have Mother do that. The Lord is more likely to believe her than you, Tim." He grinned. I grinned back, but I felt all sick inside. Then the guard said, "Time's up, lad." "I'll try to get back to see you again, Sam," I said. "Say hello to Betsy for me," he said. "Yes." "And Mother," he said. "Yes," I said. "I'll tell them to think up more telling points for General Putman, too." He grinned. "You're the best brother I've got, Tim." I tried to smile back. "I better be." "Come on, you," the guard said, so I waved good-bye and left.